Joe. Well, that's an intro because I faded in at just the right image for people to see that. Thank you. Thank you. This broadcast just got real spicy real quick.
Was a, you weren't supposed to fade anything in. I thought them. I didn't think that you were doing any imaging.
I did. That's why I said be quiet for a moment. So this intro got interrupted by uh, your
By me not seeing
intrusive
anything.
thoughts. Well, for you viewers, I will apologize on his behalf.
Sorry.
Um, because that was intrusive thoughts winning over at the wrong time. But hello and welcome to Out of State DMing. I'm your host, Lux Blackheart, and this
No,
is
you're
my
not.
co-host.
It's Gian.
Today we will be talking about ability scores and how they work within D&D. Uh, but to somewhat start this off, there is technically no such thing as a horrible score. Technically,
Depends on your idea of horrible,
yeah, yeah.
and the low and low scores just give you a an opportunity to do some out of the box thinking role play. However, they also suck.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, just like I said, there's really no such thing as a bad score. It's just your interpretation of it, and then it goes into your ability as a player to work around that low score. Uh,
However, most of us are too lazy or just don't want to work around those scores, so that's why they suck.
so they, well,
A reason for them sucking.
yeah. I will also note that one of the things DMs can do to make sure that the players in and around everything don't feel their abilities scores suck or are terrible or they have to work extra hard to get around a low thing is the you take the overall modifier as in you take the minuses and the pluses, you add them all together, and if it equals to or less than 3, the DM gets to look at that stat block and go, you need to re-roll that because that's the built-in thing to make sure players actually have an array of comfortable scores. Um, Now, to note, if you want to be a spellcaster, whatever your key ability score is for the skill spellcasting, that ability score needs to be high because once you get to a certain point, you can't cast spells because anything that's 9 or less is not casting spells worthy. So you can go, I'm a big, strong wizard, but you have an intelligence of 7. I know. Look at my spells. As the DM's like, oh, he's delusional because he has a 7. He can't cast spells. You need at minimum a 10 just to cast 0 level spells. In
I mean, that
the
would be a good character that has psychological problems and thinks that they're a powerful wizard.
yeah, that's where the role play aspect comes into it. But like I said, not
I'm just
everyone wants to
I'm
try
just
to role
refusing.
play that.
Yeah, I'm not doing it.
Yeah. Um,
I mean, I
but
could, but
the
no.
easiest way to figure out if your character can and cannot cast a spell of a certain level is you take 10, you add the spell level to it. If your key ability modifier, if your key ability score is equal to or greater than what you got, you can cast a spell. For instance, Fireball is a third level spell. So if you have a score of 13 or higher, you can cast it. But if you have a 12, you can't. Uh, it's like, for example, in one of the games I ran ran last year, there was a cleric playing was it a cleric, and
Cleric.
because of what he put in his wisdom, and the race had a minus to wisdom, he had an 11 wisdom. He
Yeah,
got real act.
I was
Yeah,
actually gonna bring
he
this
got
up.
real angry real quick when spells just weren't working. He's like, "It should work. It should work." I'm like, "What's your intelligence? 11. What's the level of that spell? 2.
Wisdom.
What's your
Wisdom.
wisdom? What's the level of the spell? What's your wisdom? What's your level of spell?" He was eventually able to dig himself out, but because of how low it was and just how long it takes for ability scores to naturally get increased without the aid of magical items such as the tomes and manuals, he couldn't cast a lot of spells that he wanted to cast or was trying to cast because his wisdom was too low. Did I point that out to him? Yes. Did he listen? No. Because when at level 1 character, you only need a 11 or higher to cast first level spells. So he didn't concern. He said, I'll fix that later. And then when he got the ability to cast second level spells, he got angry and didn't understand that his spells were just failing. It's like, that's a second level spell. It fails. It doesn't know. It's like, I don't even know why you're prepping them. He just wouldn't listen. I'm like, you can't prep spells that you can't cast because you have the inability to cast that spell, let alone prep that spell. So don't prep spells you can't cast. Did he keep doing it? Yes. Even when he got high enough to cast third level spells or even fourth level spells. It's like, no. Did we get to the point where he was able to cast his third level spells? Yes. But he was still upset that he couldn't cast any of his higher level spells. And that's simply because he didn't want to go buy the tome to increase his wisdom or anything like that because he wanted to be a upfront melee, I kill everything cleric while completely neglecting that. And to make things worse, clerics also need a high charisma. Why? Their ability to turn undead. He had a 9, which means his number of times he could do it was 2, not 3. Because it's 3 plus it's 3 modified by your charisma modifier. So he had a -1, so therefore he had a 2. He also didn't figure out why he failed a bunch because it's like, oh, you roll this, you add your charisma to it. What's your charisma? -1. You don't want it to be in the minuses if you're trying to effectively use turn undead. So
The
he,
undead turn him.
yeah, it's like the undead turn him. So when you're trying to do things, knowing what the key abilities are for the class is important. Because I will admit, a lot of the classes are, oh, we just want a high strength or a high con. Excuse me. Because that affects your melee abilities to hit and damage and your health. While other ones are like, well, if you want your bardic knowledge to work, you need a high intelligence. Uh, but we're moving on because we need to stay focused on the skill on the skills on the abilities. Um, easy way to figure out the modifier of an ability without having to go look it up. You just have to remember a very simple mathematical equation. And is if you have a even ability score, you subtract 10 and divide it by half. Round it down. And then it's the same. Well, it's -11 if it's an odd number. So if you have a 15, you minus 11 divide by 2 is right there. There's your modifier, a plus 2. If you have a 9, which is not good, you minus 11 off it and divide it by 2, which is a minus 1. Because 9 minus 11 is minus 2. Divide that, the 2 by 2, and you get 1. Voila, minus 1. I said evens, if you have it, I have an 18, minus 10, which becomes an 8, divide that by 2, you have a 4.
Or you can just, like the rest of us, memorize everything where 12, 13, or
It
yeah,
it
12,
is
13 is a 1
is
and
easy to
14, 15 is a 2,
yeah, it's easier just to remember those, but the number of people that go, "Oh my god, what is a 16?" Most of the people
3.
looking at them going, 3, but how do you know? Well, one, it says it in the book.
2
Two,
is
it's easier to
memorized.
remember that a 16 and a 17 is a plus 3, and then there's the whole uh minus 10 divide by 2. Why am I having to do extra math? It's like, well, then look up the book. It's on page 8. It tells you what a 16 is. If you're not going to believe people or remember things or remember the simple math, then
I mean, or you can just go, if it's an 11 or 12, let's see, 10, 11 is 0, and then
yeah.
every 2 it goes up by 1. 12
Yeah.
is
So
1
like
and
when you
14
hit
is 2
an
and
even
15 is
mark, the
3.
bonus goes up by 1. So it's like there's multiple easy ways to remember it, but the amount of people that remember it are uh yeah, normally not counting racial modifiers, an 18 is the best you're going to get without counting racial modifiers. An 18 is what you can consider borderline god level in stat because it's a plus 4 and it's ungodly high. That is like the, again, not counting racial statistics. That's what you count like the pinnacle perfection of whatever race you're playing is putting the 18 in that stat. For instance, in one of the current games I'm running, there's a person who's playing a small sized bat person, and they get a minus 2 to strength. He has a 16 strength. They currently, because he had an 18, he put it into strength. Now he has a 16. So he is literally the pinnacle of physical perfection for his race, not counting increase in levels and or any magical stuff. So he's extremely strong. And for go those who watch it go, 18's not that 18 is high, especially because a 10 and 11 is an average. It's average. It's the average. It's what everything gets compared to, rather it's good or not. So anything that's above an 11, it's just a good stat. This there's above average, good, excellent, and that's pinnacle perfection. Because there's plenty of people out there that go, "Oh my God, my lowest stats a 12, my highest stats 16. These all stats suck." It's like, what do you mean they all suck? You have no minuses.
What were they expecting?
It's like
All 18s?
that's what they want. Yeah, that's what a lot of players want. They want to start out with 18s. If it's 16 or it's like one of those. If it's 16 or less, they think it sucks. They think it's terrible. It's like not counting racial modifiers. Your chance of having all 16s is low, not high, low. Because the average you're gonna get on 3 die 6, or even
I mean,
4 die 6, take the highest three. It's a 10 or 11. That's your average result. It's a 10 or
there
an
was a
11.
time where I was like, if it's not a 16, my score sucks.
Yeah, and you learn real quickly that anything that's a positive is great. Because it could always be worse. It could always be a 3, which is a minus
It
4.
could.
That's like the absolute lowest you can come in at, and that's a minus 4. That's a could cause a complete re-roll of the entire set because that minus 4 is a huge. Huh. So unless someone is really trying to role play around it, that's not a stat anyone wants.
Three would be the strength of a baby. That's learning how to crawl.
That you're not technically wrong, but yeah, it's like your strength is so low that you can't lift anything. You can't do any of that.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
babies start out with like a zero strength.
no, nothing starts out with a zero stat.
Okay, strength
Because
of
you have to
one.
remember, a zero stat means there's something horrifically wrong with the character that makes the character no longer playable.
Okay, so
Strength,
they start out with a one then,
yeah,
which is still not capable of lifting their own head.
didn't know. Going all the way to carry weight, because for those at home wondering, carry weight is an extremely important part of any given thing because it can be underplayed or overplayed. A 3, well, yeah, actually, you're going to hear this and you're going to probably laugh. A 3 means you have a light load of 10 pounds, maximum weight of 30 is a heavy load, while a 1 is a 3 is your light, 6 is the cap for medium, and 10 is your heavy, which pretty much means at a 1, you can't carry any of your equipment unless it's like literally like one or two extremely light items. At a 3, you're practically what running around naked. Because like the normal starting clothing weighs 5 pounds, not counting armor or weapons. The lightest weapon, I mean, lightest weapons, the lightest armor is like 15 pounds, which means you're starting out with 20 pounds worth of equipment, which means with a strength of 3, you're already at the cuspis of your medium load. And the moment you're like, here's a dagger, it only weighs 1 pound. Well, that puts you 1 pound over your medium. Now you're in your heavy, so now you're moving slower. You can't use a bunch of your decks, and you take a -6 to all your check penalties because you are having problems moving. The moment you get to 30, though, comes into are you dragging this thing or not? There's once you
Dragging
get like
dagger, yes.
over yeah, once you get over it, you're considered over encumbered. Your speed drops to 5, and hitting you becomes super easy. And you can't really do much of anything because you're literally moving at snail space. But to start off, the ability that we're going to start talking about immediately, which we already partially covered, strength. Strength has um, 4 primary functions that it wants people to take consideration. The first one is your melee attack rolls.
Yeah.
The stronger you are, the better you are at hitting things, both on accuracy and damage. So if you're trying to be a strong melee person, strength should be what you look at. Strength should be what you focus on. Because without that, you're over reliant on everything else to hit and damage. Does someone
If
with a
you're
high
not,
enough strength can literally make a low damage weapon, like a dagger, really strong. For instance, until something happened to them, um, one of the games I'm currently running, there's a racial modifiers. Two of the characters had a 20 strength because they are focusing on melee combat because they just want to be able to hit and damage things. So they actually got really good. Had an 18, put the 18 in there. They had a +2 from their racial statistics, so they pumped that in there. Now they have 20, which is a +5. So they're pretty much Hercules, rocking around with muscles gleaming and glinting in the sun of look at me, I'm perfection. And they're able to take that dagger, a die 4 weapon that a lot of people hate on, and go, not counting anything else, I have a +5 to stabbing you, which means that's a when I rolled a hit, I add 5 to it. And when I hit you, I add 5 to it. So they're doing 6 to 9 damage. Sorry, not 6 to 9. Yeah, 6 to 9 because it's a for some reason my brain went it's a die 6. No, it's a die 4. So they're doing 6 to 9 damage on any given hit for a dagger, which means they have the ability to take something that does not that much damage and do good damage with it. Which one of them does favor the Great Club. So he was sitting there going, here's a die 10 with a +7 because two handed weapons add 50% additional strength for damage rolls, not attack, damage rolls. So his 5 turned into a 7 for it. Because you have to remember, it's D&D, you round down. So he was doing somewhere between 8 to 17 damage per smack. That's a lot. That low hit die creatures are looking at that damage and going, this is going to
I'm
suck.
dead.
Because it has to be like really high con creatures or creatures with actually multiple hit dice to survive one hit. No, oh yeah, we technically covered two of the aspects. Does damage rolls is the next one. Another thing to note: thrown weapons, you get to add your strength to damage. May not be to hit because you're throwing it, but you do get to add it to the damage of thrown weapons. So if you throw a javelin, you pull a dagger out, you toss it at someone, you whip out some throwing axes, and you pretend you're part of an axe gang and doing that, you add your strength to it. Another thing to know, and this is something I have ignored in the past. So if anyone ever says I'm a super strict DM, this right here is proof that I'm not, because I don't like listening to players overly complain about problems with two weapon fighting. So I generally ignore this part because the negatives for two weapon fighting are enough to make people hate on two weapon fighting. But if you're using your offhand for attacks in melee, you only add half your strength because it's your weak hand. Your dominant hand, all your strength. Your offhand, half. And that goes to why a lot of people are really good and really comfortable using their dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, you like to do everything with your right hand. Your left hand is somewhat lacking in that field of how well you can write, how quickly you can move it, your grip strength, because you don't use it as much. It's like exercise. If you use certain muscles more than other muscles, the muscles you use will get more refined and better, while the ones you don't use don't. So when a DM goes, "Hey, you got to make sure you got your dominant hand written down," it's important. It is real important because the moment you again use your offhand, 50% less damage from your strength. The third thing is climb, jump, swim are the pinnacle of a lot of the athletic checks you have to do. And if you don't have a good enough strength, you have to over rely on the ranks and feats. Because like some people could tell you that failing a jump check while trying to jump over something could end up with part of a spike wall lodged in your gut
Yes.
or your leg because you failed twice.
Or a ground sloth pounding you because you were trying to jump from a tree to a tree and missed.
Hmm. Well, you didn't miss. You just didn't roll high enough to get where you wanted, which meant you dropped down lower, right within the reach of a. I'm going to introduce you to the hand of God. It's mine. And before you people laugh, don't mess with the ground sloth. They can
No,
and will send you to God. It's like if you want to meet your maker, they'll do it for you.
piss
Because
off a
they are
ground sloth.
not a
So
slow, clumsy. Look, yeah.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
they're a.
we're in Zootopia here.
They look down at you. Look down at you because you're too close. Because they smelt you. I can smell you.
Ground sloths are nothing to
Yeah.
are not something you want to run into.
No. Mainly because the main reasons you run into them is because someone or something already did something stupid. Uh, that their high strength is also why people fear them because they'll smack that tree and the tree's lucky if it doesn't just because it's like I have double digits on my modifier for pimp slapping people.
Yes, back to strength.
Uh, the next thing to note is any and all strength checks, which includes breaking down doors and any like breaking down doors, lifting gates, bending bars, carrying capacity. The lower your strength is, the less likely you're going to pass those. The less likely you're going to want to have all the things you need because you can't carry it. So you, to a certain degree, have to keep an eye out for it. It does give examples of what certain creatures do have certain strengths as examples, and some of these creatures get to avoid the penalty for not having a strength score. Because normally, if you do not have a strength score, you're dead. A zero or less, you're dead. And it goes into your lungs don't have enough strength to pull in and exhale. Your heart doesn't have enough strength to pump because that is a muscle. It because like your muscles don't have the strength to do anything. And if your character has your strength drop to zero or less, it's it's real close to an insta death, but it's a very agonizing, painful instant death. Because if you ever because if you go and think of it, it's like all this stuff starts just stops. Everything just stops. They kind of just to a point loosen up a lot, which you might not think, oh, that's not that bad. There's a reason why if you take muscle reactions, you shouldn't drive. You shouldn't operate heavy machinery because you can't get the grip. You're slower. You're more sluggish. Bad things start to happen if you overexert yourself. So when you drop to a zero, you're like you kind of just like slop down to the ground, and it's not even a painful slop. I mean, a painless slop. It's somewhat painful because your entire body kind of has this panic attack as it like takes a few seconds for your body to catch up with the fact that you're dead now. Uh, but that being said, there is a few creatures that are listed as having no strength at all, simply because of what they are. They are technically permitted to. Uh, we're gonna take a well. My co-host is gonna take a quick break. He has to take care of something real quick, so he'll be back momentarily. So I'm gonna take this moment to take a drink. Coffee. I love coffee. If you love coffee, drink some coffee. Not too much coffee, but drink some. I also like apple juice. No, but the first couple of creatures are the Eleb, Shadow, and Will-O-Wisp. They're examples of creatures that have no strength. They also don't need strength to live. There's a Will-O-Wisp is a ball of light, and a Shadow is it's a type of undead. It doesn't. It's already dead. It doesn't care. The human has the same strength on average as a beholder and a dire rat. That's thinking of just how powerful a dire rat is. They commonly have a 10 or an 11 strength, which is really strong for a very tiny creature. By very tiny, I don't mean like literal rat size. Think of a small child, and voila, that's a dire rat. So technically, that's not small. It's actually quite large creature. It's just a big freaking rat. Things that usually have like an 18 strength for the people that want to grasp what things are usually super strong. Centaurs, displacer beasts, and minotaurs. So when you think of the mythos of like a minotaur, they're depicted as being extremely strong, tough. They average out at usually an 18 or a 19, which, like I said earlier, would be like the pinnacle of human strength. Is the average strength for a minotaur. So when people try to say your character's weak for having a 16, you can go, "No, I'm not. I'm almost as strong as a minotaur." Because again, minotaurs always depicted as being super strong, super tough creatures. Same with the centaurs. Not a lot of people know about displacer beasts, but that's a whole nother jar for a whole nother situation. But the centaurs, same mythos as the minotaur, are always also depicted as extremely strong people. Even though people are like, they shoot the bows real good. They can punch you really hard too, or kick you because they have a lower half of a horse. Uh, Things that are considered stronger than that are ogres that usually have around a 20 or 21. So they're super strong, but only roughly 2 points higher than the starting maximum. Then you have the Gorgon, which there's multiple types of Gorgon. The memory serves the most common one is the boar, not boar. Don't know why I thought boar. The bull, brain fart there. When it comes to things that like have outrageously high strengths, like in the 30s, fire giant. giants, which aren't the strongest, but not the weakest out of the giants. They usually have a 30. And when it comes to like the cuspice of you probably shouldn't be trying to fight this are dragons. Like the great worm gold dragons usually have a 46 or higher. Now they're good dragons, so I don't know why you're trying to kill it because like it's a good guy. Why are you trying to fight a good guy? But that's an example of just how strong dragons can get. And right there, that's an extremely huge modifier. Because that's a plus 18, which means if it's going to pimp slap you with its hand, it's adding 18 minimum. And whatever its die damage is, it's adding 18 to it. So even high level, high hit point characters are looking at that smack and not liking it because it's going to be in the there's the amount of dice that dragon that character uses is in the multiple. You're looking at over 20 damage minimum, which some people might go, well, my level 15 barbarian can take that hit. It's like, it, yeah, and you probably have around, if you rolled good and have a good con, you probably have around 100 hit points. But when something smacks you and its minimum is almost a quarter of your hit points, you should probably reevaluate what you're trying to fight. And that goes into like, why some things you should just if your character has no idea what it is, because remember, role playing, your character doesn't know everything, you don't know what everything is. If something looks like it could pick up a car and chuck it, or it uses horses at the gym as weights, it's probably a good idea to not try to fight it. If you know what it is and you know normally how strong they are, unless you're absolutely positively sure that you can take it, don't. There's plenty of things that look weak but can hit really hard. Like for example of what I said earlier about a player who chose a small race that has a minus to his strength. He has a 16. Now he doesn't because of what he is. He doesn't look like he could hurt you. He doesn't look like he can put up much of a fight. But the moment he starts swinging, you're gonna go, maybe it wasn't a good idea fighting this bat person because again, that's a +3 to hit and a +3 to damage, which is pretty good for a small sized creature in general. Because normally small sized creatures don't get they get the shaft when it comes to damage of weapons and stuff because he likes to use the dagger. A small sized dagger is only a die 3, but because of his high strength, he's getting somewhere between 4 to 6 damage whenever he stabs something, which is still really good for a level 1 character. Where is it? Another example for trying to comparison are baboons. People who don't know anything about baboons just think they're monkeys with big teeth. Those who know that baboons they're not the strongest out of monkeys, but they're definitely not the weakest. They're depicted as usually having a 14 to a 15 strength, which is pretty tough because you don't want to get smacked by a baboon. It's not going to feel good. They'll like smack you, grab your lunch, and run off with it. On another lower end of strength, you have badgers. Even though some people are like badgers are pretty strong, they're pretty tough, those things. They usually have a 8 or a 9, which is a -1. I will say that it is a -1, so that they're not really getting up there. But if you look at how they're described as being tough little gits. Uh, a large shark, which is covers a lot of sharks. This is usually sharks between uh, like 10 and 15 feet is what they consider a large shark, which is a big shark. They're usually depicted as having like a 16 or a 17. And those can easily like grab you and rip your arm off.
Shark, 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 shark,
Shark, shark, shark, shark.
shark, shark, shark.
Baby shark. Do, 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 do,
No,
do,
nobody wants that.
do. Exactly. Because it eats your face. No, but like those are the samples of like some things that are really low, some things that are really high, some things that are in the cuspids of being in the middle. And it's one of those things that looking at this little chart here, you can kind of have a feeling of where your character would fall. Because again, the normal human, which is the basis for a lot of stuff in D&D, 10 and 11 is that's their jam. That's the bread and butter of the average Joe. Which I still think is somewhat funny that that's also the average strength of a dire rat.
Yes, Arnold Schwarzenegger at one time had an 18 strength.
Yeah, and then age started to kill him on that one. Yeah, that's what got Arnold age, which he's still really well built and healthy for his age, but he can't lift as much as he used to. He can't do any of that much as he used to because his age. It will. I don't want to see that man get hurt. Uh, hurt. I'm a fan of Arnold. He needs to stay safe. I don't want to see him trying to. Like, I can still lift this car. I'm just gonna say I believe you because I don't want you getting a hernia and dying or something like that. Because no, a a, a dead Arnold is not a good Arnold. We need that man to stay alive. Because who else is gonna tell us to get to the chopper when the apocalypse finally happens?
Yes. Have you moved on to Dex yet?
I was about to. Uh, dexterity. This is a good stat to represent your hand-eye coordination, agility, your reflexes, balance, and it is a multifaceted skill, just like how all the skills are. But this is also a skill that you can't sleep on. If you want to be a good ranged combatant, you need a high dex because it's what you use to judge your range attacks. So if you want to throw something, being strong helps if you're throwing that axe because it helps with damage. But hitting the target is your dexterity. So if you're slacking on your dex, you don't want to be a thrower because throwing requires you to actually be able to hit your target. To address that message I just got, technically no, because we went over other things beforehand. So ha ha ha. That person who messaged me, you can go suck an elf. Ha ha. This was more like 20 minutes on strength because remember we had other things like someone's impulsive fingering. Yes, for those who are skipping ahead past that stuff, go watch the beginning if you
Oh,
want to get the reference.
that. That
Yeah.
part, yes.
Um, Another thing that dexterity is important for is your armor class. Your dexterity modifier directly plays into it. Now, your armor does restrict how much you can use. Because there's some that are like full plate that's like, oh, it's a +1. Then like breast half plate is a +0. Then you have like padded that's a +8. You don't get that modifier that when it says max dex, you don't get its max dex. That's that represents how high you can go. So if you only have a +3, that's the maximum you can use. So if you want to
Or if
overly
you're
be
if you're planning on using plate mail or any of the heavier armors, you don't have to really worry about having a very high dex because you're not going to be able to use your modifier to
for
enhance
AC.
your armor class.
You only need to rely on it if you're trying to go an archer. So if you're trying to,
Well, or if you're only going
if you're
to,
if you're focusing on ranged, yes. If you're not, it doesn't matter.
it does if you're a rogue.
Rogues don't rely on heavy armor.
Oh no, no, no. Okay, I was
Yeah,
thinking
if we're
high
talking
dex,
about
not heavy
armor,
armor.
I mean, if we're talking about armor, a low dex only. A low dex is good for higher armors like full plate, half plate, breastplate. Those heavy armors that give you, I mean, that either go you can only use a one or you can't use any of it. Lighter armors let you use more of it, so you can go for the cheaper lighter armor and still have a high AC because you have a high dex. Uh, if you want to be able to successfully not get insta killed by a fireball or a dragon barfing its breath all over its bad breath on you, reflex is good for that because it feeds directly into that saving throw. Uh,
Dexterity feeds into reflex, not reflex feeds into reflex.
Same thing.
Yeah, you keep thinking that.
And there is a bundle of skills that dexterity helps you with. That some people like, I'm just gonna dump all my skill points into this. Who cares about having a high stats? Like, that's not a bad approach, but having a high stat still helps, mainly because it lets you spread out your skill points a little bit more. Because like balance, escape artist, hide, move silently, open locks, ride, sleight of hand, tumble, use rope are all dex skills. And those are all pretty much rogue skills as well. So having a high dex means you don't have to stress on making sure you have a bunch of points in each one because you can spread the points out because that dex modifier helps you. Excuse me. So, like I said, it covers AC, it covers reflex saving throws, and it covers a bundle of skills and your ability to hit things in range combat. And again, humans have on average a 10 or 11. I'm going to state this now. Humans generally have a 10 or 11 in everything. Uh, Boars usually also have that same range. Um, Ogres and fire giants usually have a 8 or a 9. So they may be super strong, but they're also clumsy. Uh, when it comes to things that generally have a high dexterity that are like the around the like, this is start of pinnacle. You have astral divas, which are a type of angel, usually have an 18 to a 19 as their average. So you so just like with strength, the list goes, okay, here's where you stand, and here's all the stuff that you're better than, and here's all the stuff you get to look forward eventually being as good as. Because again, levels and equipment and stuff can increase your dexterity. So don't ever go, oh man, I have the dexterity of an ogre zombie, which is a 6. Eventually, with enough levels and or worn equipment and or manuals of dexterity, you can come out of that hole. Next is Constitution. Constitution is hands down the most important stat anyone can have. If anyone ever says otherwise, stop playing with them. Because it does not matter what
Constitution.
class you are playing, what race you are playing, what you're trying to go through. Constitution is how healthy your character is. It's how much hit points you can have. It it's it's a pinnacle thing Is that something that all the classes have in common? Is needing a decent to good constitution. Just like I said, first up, it determines how many hit points you have. The healthier you are, the more you get. The more unhealthy you are, the less you have. And there is people out there that don't that go, well, if I have an 8 con and I level up, and I roll a 1, I don't get any hit points because that's a -1. It does make sense because your character's not healthy. It is the only retroactive stat. It's the only stat that the moment it gets lowered, or the moment it gets higher, it directly affects your health. So when you go from a 9 to a 10, you get a bunch of hit points back. Just you go, well, I just reached level 4, so I got that 1 point. I put it here. You get 4 hit points back immediately. Not one. This is not just that level, it's that level and all past levels and all future levels. So you immediately get it back. If you get poisoned by something, like the spell that goes, okay, you failed this, I roll a die 10, you lose that many con points. That's a very, very effective I'm ending this fight right now spell. Because if the person rolls high enough, they'll sap you of all your con. And if you have like a 10 or less, there's a chance you auto die. But also at the same point, because you lose hit points at the rate of, for every 2 points your con gets lowered by, you lose 1 hit point per level. So if you're like a level 10 character with like a 20 con and someone hits you with poison, you fail the save, they roll max on it, you go from a 20 all the way to a 10. So you go from a +5 to a +0. You take 5, you times it by 10, and that's how many hit points you lose because your body went from being super healthy to not so super healthy. You went to average health. So that's a real easy way to kill anything right then and there. That, and if anyone puts a 9 or less in con, they want to die. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna they sugarcoat it. They want to die. It because your starting hit points comes out less than everyone else. When you level up, you're getting less hit points than everyone else. You're going to fail your fortitude saving throw more often because Constitution plays directly into fortitude. So poisons, diseases, not getting uh, killed in your sleep, all cover that. Not to mention the fact that there's Constitution checks that if a team says, "Hey, you need to make a con check," if you have a negative, there's a good chance whatever negative thing's going to hit you, it's going to hit you. It also governs concentration. Concentration is an important skill for magic users because if there's anything that's causing you that could cause you to lose focus, lose concentration on your spells, concentration helps correct that. So for anyone going, well, I'm a magic user, I don't need a high. Yes, you do. One, you have the lowest hit dice out of all the classes, and two, concentration. So when you mess up and you cast a spell and someone smacks you in melee, this you weren't combat casting. Guess what? You're going to most likely lose that spell because you lost focus. And it's not the DM's fault. It's not the monster's fault. It's not the rest of the party's fault. It's your fault for not taking it seriously. Which is somewhat funny. This is, again, it is a very important stat, but concentration is the only skill it governs. Uh, Wisdom. Oh, wisdom's not next.
Intelligence. One
Intelligence
of the
is
two.
next.
I don't think it really matters.
Well, I'm going in order, so yes, it does.
Yeah,
No,
man, see, man.
intelligence is how smart you are. Now, I will state this: that if you go, well, I have a 9, so my character's slap yourself, because no, that's not a 9. 8 or 9 is below average, which means below average intelligence. You're not retarded. Don't pretend to be.
No, you have the intelligence of a 10-year-old.
I've met some pretty smart 10-year-olds, so saying 10-year-old it isn't quite
Just
there.
because the 10-year-old has an above average intelligence does not mean that 9 isn't the average of a 10-year-old.
Coming from someone who doesn't have a minor background in being a teacher. God, I did that, didn't you? I do not
Um,
miss that museum. Bad times all around. Intelligence is important for some spellcasters because it's important for wizards, but it should be important generally to everyone.
well,
For
if you want your
generally,
skill to be able to progress,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, for generally two reasons. The first reason is starting languages. If you do not have a bonus on intelligence, you're starting off with one language. The higher your bonus, the more languages you get. And for those who think that, oh, it's not that important, it can become real important because some races, common is not is not a free language for them, where they have to take it as a bonus language. Now, I will state that common is common if you're playing a truly generic out of the book game. Everyone gets common and their racial language, so it kind of doesn't matter because unless otherwise noted, everyone's speaking common. So if you're playing in that type of game, you'd say it doesn't technically matter unless you run into something with a super niche language problem. For other games, like in my world, language is extremely important because depending on where you're from, depends on if you have options to have the merchant tongue, which is the only thing that's close to common as possible, but not everyone gets access to it. So languages are important because it's not just a sign of intelligence, it makes a lot of roleplay things a lot easier. Um, for instance, in one of the games I play, one of the characters is smart enough, he has a lot of languages. Well, another person has two. So it's really problematic when one person's like, "What is he saying? What is he saying?" While the other person goes, "Oh, I'm going to give you not proper um, information that's being shared because we got to go here and fight this." Okay, he said a lot. Is there any more? He said, "What we need is these guys have. We got to go fight them. That's what we need." When he should have said a lot more because a lot more information was given.
Hmm.
But translation problems is always a problem. The other reason why intelligence is super important, skill points. Skill points, when it comes to skills, is how you fix having generally average stats. Because if you have a high enough intelligence, you get a bunch of skill points. And even though having like a high strength, high dexterity, high constitution, high wisdom, and stuff, as much as that helps with all your skills, an intelligence not only governs a bundle of skills itself, but it determines how many of those points you get. So when some classes like fighters get 2 plus intelligence modifier, that's not a lot of skill points. So you want to correct that as best as possible by having a high intelligence. Then there's other classes like the rogue that go, I want a high intelligence. I don't need a high intelligence. There's a difference. Why? Because they have an 8 plus intelligence modifier for skill points. So they're on the opposite end of the spectrum of like people over here. There's there's a lot of times where you can end up, if you roll correctly, pick the right class that has a high intelligence modifier, where you can end up having too many skill points. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen because you can end up going, I have 4 in everything, and I have a few points left
I've
because
never
that
experienced that.
you've never experienced it. I've experienced it, and in several of my games, several other players have experienced it because a lot of the classes that don't have a high skill point don't have a lot of skills. So when people playing those classes have a race that comes in with a higher intelligence, and they put themselves being super smart because they don't want to be the stupid fighter, they want to be the super excellent smart tactician fighter. They're coming in with an ungodly amount of skill points versus everyone else because like, because of the race and what I rolled, I have a 20 intelligence, which means I have a plus 7 skill points, which at level 1 is you take the 7, you times it by 4, and that's how many points you get. Fighters don't get that many skills. So you can end up having the skills that you do have right there maxed out at level 1 with a few points left over going, huh, I can cross class into knowledge tactician now in these skills because I have the points left to do that while still being better than everyone else at these skills because I had the skill points to do it. So intelligence is key if you're trying to be a very skillful individual. The next one is wisdom, also known as
Clerics,
your common sense meter. Because you can be super smart, but common sense, no one, not everyone has.
just like in life, common sense is not common.
Exactly. It is more niche than some of the other ones because it primarily governs 2 factors. 3, if you're a divine caster. The first one is your will saving throws. It is your ability to shrug off mental effects like a dragon's fear or someone trying to do charm person. Ooh. That's what you
That
use
was
to,
very charming.
yeah, fine. Dominates. It's your ability to shrug off a lot of magical effects. It also governs your ability to use the skill heal, your listen, your spot, your sense motive, aka your BS detector, survival, which is how good you survive in the wilderness, and your professions. So if you're a profession muse, profession cook, profession boogeyman, it governs that profession.
I want to see that profession.
Yeah, it's hard to pull off. But if you're a cleric, druid, paladin, or ranger, your spells go off of wisdom. So the higher it is, the higher of those spells you can cast, the better your saving DCs for those are. In general, just how good of a spellcaster you are for those there. Like when I brought up the cleric who only had a 12 intelligence. well, not 12 notes, but
Wisdom.
yeah, 11 wisdom. He had to wait a while before he dug himself out of that hole. So that it's pretty important to have high up. The last one, charisma.
Your
It
sense
is
of presence and how you carry yourself.
yes, it governs yeah, um, your force of your personality, persuasive, personal magnetism, ability to lead, and physical attractiveness. So, and they in better ter- uh, terms, people who have really good fashion sense, high charisma. People who are able to talk a drowning man into drinking more water, charisma. Someone who can lead a horse off a cliff, charisma. Someone who you look at and your heart like skips a beat. You're like, oh dear God, oh, that woman is divine. Charisma, because it's a multifaceted skill where you can be like you can have a stutter, a lisp, Tourette's, but people still love you and want to be around you because when those things aren't kicking off, the words you use are just the right words. The way your voice sounds, sultry, seductive, charming. The way you look, like all of it, can make people see past random things that a lot of people may say, "Oh, that's no, you." Uh, I was actually about to use an example, but I can't use an example because that would definitely get me in trouble on YouTube. Because there's a particular individual that, if you're old enough to know who he is, if you look at him, you're like, uh. But then you go and look up what he does for a living and every all of that and how many people want to work with him. You go, his charisma is off the charts. And for you newer people, newer generations, his Riz game is Riz-tastic.
Please don't do that again, ever.
Riz-tastic. Hey, we
Just
gotta appeal to
no,
the younger people too, not just us old geezers.
absolutely not.
Was it tough? We're canceled.
Cool.
Yeah, but like in general terms, it's a check that represents your attempt to influence people. Because it governs bluff, diplomacy, disguise, gather information, handle animal, intimidate, perform, and use magical devices. For those of you don't are going, what do you mean use magical devices? You're pretty much doing a charisma check to make a magical device work properly because you're wooing the magic to magic. Because like, here's a magical staff. Well, if you're not a wizard or a sorcerer, you can't make the magic of the staff magic because you don't have the abilities to make it magic. So you have to pretty much show it you care. Now fireball.
Not enough
I,
charisma to use it.
yeah, fireball didn't fireball. Uh, it is your ability to sing, dance, tell jokes, stand up comedians. So if you look at some stand up comedians where you're like, uh, but then you hear their jokes, you're like, oh dear, this guy's hilarious. Charisma. They may not be physically attractive, but their ability to make you go, this the bomb, is there. Let's see. Ooh, this is important for the clerics and paladins out there. Charisma is used for turning attempts. Because when you roll that check, it determines how well you do. A lower charisma, probably not going to pass that check. Higher charisma, yeah, you go charismatic person. Uh, but that's pretty much all six of the stats. Technically, if you're trying to go from a certain era of D&D, there is a seventh stat, but I'm not going to go into that stat. I just want you guys to know that it exists. Uh, the two reasons I'm not going to go into is one, you can easily make jokes out of its name, and two, you'll start an argument with people who look at it as a replacement to charisma when it's not, because it's supposed to be working in conjunction with charisma, but people refuse to see it that way. A certain
It's
someone
taking half
notes
of
what.
it's taking half of what charisma is and dumping it into a different stat.
Yeah, while also having its own base functionality and stuff like that, which you should know what stat that is because you're currently playing in a
Yes,
game that involves that. And I love and hate that stat with a passion of a thousand dying suns. Because nothing says I wear my full plate everywhere. You're going to get helmet hair. My character's bald. No, he's not. Why? I'm a cleric, and that's one of the stats that goes up with clerics. And I have the highest you can technically get away with.
I'm shielding myself to
So
keep
I'm
everybody.
yes, because if you thought yeah, charisma was like making people go, oh yeah, that person, boom. This stat um, is the it's an automatic. If it's high enough, people will just show up to fawn
Just
over
to be
you,
around you.
just to be around you. If it's low enough, people want to run from you. But that pretty much covers the attributes. Uh, Next week we will be going over everyone's favorite nonsense intelligence person, the barbarian.
Hulk smash.
Uh, as I showed people with future content, just I was double checking it real quick. Content leak. Uh, but on that note, thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.